Welcome back to another podcast episode where we help aspiring developers get jobs and junior developers grow. So with me today, I invited on Vincent. If you have been following a lot of the Lambda drama, he's probably a big result of that. I know a lot of people have kind of reached out to me and they wanted to know what I thought of your article. And you actually, so a lot of times when we talk about coding boot camps and stories kind of float around, there's not a lot of thorough research done. You don't bring in fact checkers, like there's not a lot of actual journalism done. And what you've done is you've discovered kind of how Lambda has been misleading in the past, and you did a lot of research on it, and you kind of shined a light on something that a lot of people needed to see. And that's kind of where I discovered you. So yeah, I'll kind of just let you take it away. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Vincent Woo. I'm probably best known on the internet as the founder of CoderPad, which I think many aspiring developers have probably seen at some point in an interview for a programming job.
Wait, you were really the founder?
Yeah. Oh, you didn't know?
No, I actually missed that.
No. I created the company known as CoderPad in about 2013. And I sold it about 2 years ago in about 2019. Incidentally, that was about when I began working on the Lambda School story for the first time a couple of years ago. So, I've been sort of coding bootcamp adjacent for a long time. Like, I know Jesse Farmer, one of the co-founders of Dev Bootcamp, effectively the first coding bootcamp. And I've hired bootcamp grads at CoderPad in the past. And so, I have an interest in the space. I think it's a really interesting mode of education. Obviously can, completely change people's lives. And I think that's always what interested me. And a couple of years ago, I became interested in Lambda School in particular. I think, because of they're very brash marketing and their executives have very big personalities and they're hard to miss, like they actively solicited attention and I gave it to them. So, I remember the origin story of my reporting on Lambda School is effectively, I saw a really weird tweet by one of their executives, Trevor McKendrick, wherein this is now deleted, but at the time he tweeted, and this went viral on Twitter. He said, if you don't believe that Lambda School is a $100 billion company, you do not understand the American economy. And I just thought that was like a crazy thing to say. Like, even if he was right, like that was a really mean way to put it. Like he could have said, Lambda School is a really good company and I think it'll be worth $100 billion, eventually. And, some people don't see it yet, but I'm sure they will with time. Like that, that's like the positive way of putting that. But he put it in this really aggressive. I thought it was just so funny. It's like that I don't understand is why the company will be so valuable. So I think I retweeted that with some snarky comment. And then what I realized after I did that, people just started telling me things about the school that seemed crazy at the time. And that's kind of where all of this came from, is like literally just goofing around on Twitter. And then, I began to take calls from like, a variety of different sources who wanted to tell me things that didn't really jive with the official story of Lambda. And, that was late 2019. And my first round of reporting was early 2020. And then I've just done a more thorough job recently in 2021, but it's all the same kind of thread, right? Which is like all my reporting is like, try to get documents, try to show that there is a contradiction between what was said publicly and what is said internally, force the school to try to explain this difference, and then just publish how they fail to explain effectively.
Why did he post that tweet?
Which one? The one I described?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know. The guy's crazy. That guy was like the chief of staff of Lambda School. He was basically like, I don't know, I think some guy that graduated from BYU with Austin at some point. And chief of staff is not a real job. It's sort of, it's what we call men who are effectively executive assistants, but they're too proud to take that title. So I don't know what that guy's doing now. I'm assuming pretty much nothing. Most of the original executive team has quit Lambda School and purport to be working on new projects or something, but I haven't really seen anything bubble up yet. Maybe we will eventually.
So it's a really interesting tweet. So I've reviewed a lot of coding boot camps. That's my brand, right? And I noticed a lot of CEOs tend to stay away from controversy. They really shy away from it, and very traditional in the business sense, and like really focus a lot on professional PR. And there are a few programs that dig into it a little bit. They'll even get petty on Twitter. Do you feel like...
Oh, yeah, who comes to mind, actually? I'm curious who you think fits the bill.
Maybe we'll dig into it a little bit, but I actually have talked to, I really don't want to call them out, but I've talked to a few CEOs. Well, I can even mention this, like, there are a few CEOs that have reached out to me, and they literally want me to just like rip on them. They want me to like dig into their program and tear it apart. Like, because what ends up happening is no matter how like really critical my reviews are, I still bring them tons of students. And it's a really interesting perspective. And when you recognize that, like, why not be controversial? Why not get that attention as long as you can handle it?
You think they're strategic about this sort of thing?
I think so.
Yeah, I think Austin is for sure. This other executive, I'm less sure that is the case. Like, I think a lot of them just sort of tweet from the hip, you know, and I think they have an innate understanding of like, I also think that just Twitter does this to you, you know, like the tweets where you say something weird, get more interaction. You also get more followers, even if you say something dumb. So like, I think almost even naturally, like irrespective of running a school, this just happens to people who are interested in being famous in any way, you know? And like, I'm guilty of this as well. Like, if you look at my tweets, they're dumb. Like, I make a lot of really dumb tweets. Like, I understand well.
I do too. I have a lot of dumb tweets. Well, you know, like I told you, I was getting rid of Twitter. I deleted 2 Twitter accounts by now. It's just not the platform for me. But, there is a strategy, even like you said, just being petty and stupid. And I wonder, it just feels like Lambda really grew. Like, when we think about all these other coding boot camps that have grown over the past 5 years and really profited in the industry, it's interesting. It's really interesting that they always compare themselves, not always, a lot of them compare themselves with Lambda. It's like, at least we're not Lambda. At least we don't have an ISA model like Lambda. At least we don't have a pricing model like Lambda. Or
really?
Yeah. And I
thought you were going to say something completely different. I thought you were going to say that a lot of boot camps compare themselves to colleges more than anything.
So kind of. So what a lot of coding boot camps I see doing are they're trying to get out of this coding bootcamp branding, which has become very terrible. I feel like, you know, and we could dig into this more, but like the coding bootcamp industry, I feel like is coming at an end, at least over the next 5 years, of a lot of profits. So you see coding bootcamps getting bought out, and you're trying to like get associated with big brands, or we're not a 3-month coding bootcamp anymore. We're not going to rush you through it. We want to invest more time in you. So we're going to extend this 6 months. We're going to extend this a year. We're kind of a replacement for an associate's degree, at least, but we're going to be way better than that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the experimentation is good at minimum. To your earlier point about like boot camps comparing themselves to Lambda School, I'm not super aware of that. I'm aware of like, there have only been a couple boot camps that I'm aware of that have tried to trawl for students in the wake of Lambda School, like to take advantage of the controversy to find new students. But for the most part, I found them to be, most boot camps tend to be pretty quiet about, at least on their official accounts, about any of this controversy. And I mean, I think that was partly why I wrote my follow-up piece, which is more ostensibly the point of our interview today, about how, you know, it's actually the case that a lot of larger boot camps, I think, are making very similar statistical misrepresentations to Lambda School. So in my recent piece, I cover specifically, I think, General Assembly, Coding Dojo, and Flatiron I take a look at. Just a few of the biggest boot camps, right? Like, I just picked some names out of hats and try to see what their outcome reporting is. Because like big enough schools will usually have some outcome reporting that is like audited by some accounting firms, so they can't lie over much. They have to lie through the structure of their reporting. And you see some pretty shocking stuff, you know, like stuff that like in a lot of ways is as bad as Lambda School, depending on, you know, what you mean by bad. But like, for instance, the Coding Dojo or whatever is like excluding 40% of its graduates from counting towards its job placement rate, like fully 40%, which seems absolutely crazy to me, like just totally unethical. But, you know, like a lot of this stuff just doesn't get reported on, I think, because a lot of these bootcamps are very quiet actually about their own press, or they're careful only to state only positive press. And there's very few reporters who want to try to make a story out of statistical analysis. You know what I mean? Like the story in that case is like, look, this number they said is the wrong number. It's not very emotive. Like if you want to make it emotive, you have to find like a student whose like life was ruined by it. And that's a ton of field work. It took months, really. So for the most part, a lot of those stories I think go untold. That was my motivation for doing the more general bootcamp story. That and like informing students of some trickery that they might be facing. I don't know. Should I summarize what this is actually about for the podcast?
In a second, I think I have a question. So
sure.
Yeah. Okay. So we had talked a little bit about how you kind of designed the article and like it gets moderated and filtered out into this final product that you feel like is going to have the effect that you wanted to have. But you also said that it can kind of invoke a lot of emotion when you get these student stories, of especially ones that you can empathize with. Student's life was ruined. You're like, oh my God, I can't believe like this kind of stuff happens. I just see like all these success rates that they're advertising. This is incredible. I almost can't believe it. I have to dig into it more. So have you, because video is really powerful. Have you thought about just interviewing a few students where their life was ruined?
I've interviewed a ton of students whose lives were sort of ruined.
Publicly?
Oh, no. I mean, almost no one would agree.
Yeah, that is something.
I mean, I could propose. There's a couple of students whose lives were so altered that they've been willing to do public video interview about it. And some of them have. Like, you're aware of Pablo Vahanian, I think, did a very public interview on a YouTube channel about Lambda School. That was the subject, actually, of some of my reporting, like that the school tried to get him to take down this video. I thought it was very striking.
What was the video?
The video is like, it's like this, like some guy's interviewing him. He's asking about his time at Lambda School as a student, and he's giving fair answers. Like he, in fact, credits the school with being like good in some respects and bad in others. And I would say it's much more balanced an interview than you would expect for a student that was wronged by the school. And he was simultaneously negotiating to terminate his ISA because he had like withdrawn or whatever. And he felt like he hadn't really learned much at the school or enough. Well, he felt like, I think primarily he felt that he was betrayed. And when the school shortened its curriculum and removed its TAs mid-cycle for him, he felt like a promise to him had been violated and wanted like cancellation of his ISA. And the school is trying to negotiate with him for it. And they asked him to pay $15,000 and also to take down the interview, which I thought was a really, that was a really striking thing to ask a student to do in order to be released from future debt. And so that made it into the story, but he's one of the few. We may do another. My editor's interested in doing like a profile of a particular student who I interviewed like in the next month or so, but I don't know. Video I think would be interesting, but they all kind of like like over Zoom. I don't know how compelling it is, you know. Like maybe if we were there in the flesh.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's very compelling. I think
it's just so much more work is the thing. Like we don't really have the resources.
I feel like when I saw some Lambda students in their Twitter accounts, they literally would create entire Twitter accounts just for months tweeting about how much they hate Lambda, and every little thing they could find that was against a coding school, they would tweet about it. And it was like this huge, depressing, pessimistic view. And then they would also, I'm not saying Pablo specifically, but just like a lot of people that hated on Lambda, they would also have very petty tweets with everything else, right? It wasn't just Lambda, it was a personality trait that carried over into Lambda. And I'm not saying Lambda didn't screw them over, but I think sometimes it's very easy, especially on Twitter, to distinguish. I mean, like your tweet, you did a lot of research, but it's hard to distinguish when someone is extremely emotional and can't really see the pros and cons of it. They can't really give advice if the program's going to be or it's going to be really good for a potential student. It's like they haven't really processed that emotion quite yet. And so
I mean, it's hard. I mean, especially given people in the position, like may not have a lot of training and processing. Like this may be the first time in a lot of these people's lives that they feel like they've been betrayed to the extent that they've been betrayed, you know what I mean? And that they don't have like an emotional, like framework in place to be able to process that emotion, to me, is, I agree, it's sad and also confusing for readers. Definitely, like a lot of people, I've seen some accounts like who agree with me and like yes and to such an extreme degree that like they lose the thread. You know, like I think there is a point where like I tried to not, I'm petty, but only so petty. You know what I mean? And there is like an unproductive threshold that I think some of the students cross. But I also think like even that is data. You know what I mean? Like even that, like that a human would be inspired to such extreme, almost self-destructive lengths out of a sense of vengeance is information, right? Like this doesn't happen with every school. I wonder why, you know? Like, is it because they, you know, recruit different types of students, or is it something about the curriculum itself? I can't say, right? But that it's happening at all, I think, is sort of telling. And you know, I met one student who had made like a whole website. I think it was like lambdaschool.site or something, and it was, I wouldn't exactly say it was deranged, but it was on like the deranged spectrum, and like it was just like every piece of thing they wanted to throw at Lambda School. And they like basically believed themselves to be in a sort of holy war. And, you know, I really sympathized because like my motivations are not entirely dissimilar, but like I have the means and the time. And with a lot of these students, it didn't, like, it seemed like they were, a lot of them are upset because they were promised means, but weren't given it. And like their crusades are conducted from not exactly a place of economic security. So it is a little worrying, I feel, too.
I completely get what you're saying, and I can empathize with that. And that even that massive amount of motion is telling. And I think where I come from, like my perspective is, like you mentioned, like you don't really hear that about other coding bootcamps, but I do. Like I have a lot of students that reach out, and I feel like everything that people have said about Lambda, I think Lambda is actually, I do feel like Lambda deserved to be called out on a lot of stuff. I really do. But I also like a lot of stuff that people are saying, even about the ISAs and like taking away certain, you know, people that are actually going to review your code and trying to automate the process and kind of some deception. Because I did follow Austin's the CEO. That's his name, right? Mm-hmm. Followed his Twitter account for a little bit. And, you know, there were some tweets that he just shouldn't have tweeted, but it's like, I've seen this from other coding boot camps. I know students that are pissed off, but they do sign those NDAs and they kind of get trapped. And a lot of people get scared. We were just talking about like legality and stuff like that. When you kind of bring in an attorney or like threaten someone with an attorney that has no money already, that probably is on an ISA because they're not, you know, they don't have a lot of income to bring initially. It's, they get quiet. Right.
Yeah.
So I hear these stories outside of Lambda. And so when I see this like flood against Lambda, I'm like, this happens elsewhere. Like this, why is the focus just on Lambda? Why are all these other students kind of being so quiet? Because this is more common than people realize.
Yeah, I think it's pretty common. I think like just with Lambda, it crossed a boundary where there was enough outpouring that students began to feel safer about being public about their testimony. I think it may happen for other schools. I think the school needs to be a certain size. One, and it needs to inspire a certain emotion in its students if it's failing. And I think if the school does a good job keeping its students isolated from each other too, like, then I think students have a harder time coming forward. Like, Lambda School had one big Slack, and I think that caused a lot of problems for it in some respects, because it did allow students to begin coordinating a little better to begin. I've talked to a lot of students who said something to the effect of like, oh, I thought it was just me. But then like on random chance, I happened to like talk to this other guy from like a different cohort or whatever. And he was like, yeah, the same, you know, same experience. And they were like, whoa, like, and maybe it's not just me, you know, and like if the school is actually effectively preventing that from happening, it can sort of pre-silence a lot of complaints. So you have seen these schools crack down on like these Slack communication channels somewhat. And yeah, I think it's one of the advantages of in real life too, at least for the school. They have better control of at least a classroom atmosphere. You know, they can observe the mood more directly. They can sort of nip problems before they become problems. And, you know, it's tough. It's tough to do online. I think That's the main thing that I feel. There's such a huge gap in doing purely online pedagogy that we know so little about it right now. Like, it's such a new field of education. No one's really solved it. That was actually the main thing that got me going about Lambda School in the beginning. Lambda School, you're right, has commonalities with other boot camps, but it's also unique in two important respects. At least it was at the time, that it was totally online at the size that it was very novel at the time. And their financing scheme was very novel at the time. And I thought, how could they have solved both of these problems so swiftly with so little experimentation and so little forethought, when these are like huge unsolved problems in like the literature of educational instruction? I just couldn't believe my eyes. And I think that skepticism led me to dig deeper. You can see it now. I mean, this position is being effectively vindicated, right? Like, they're rolling back their ISAs. Like, as part, I don't know if you saw, like, no. Yeah, as part of Lambda School's rebranding to Bloom Institute, the ISA terms have become much, much worse. Like, I think they'll cost you about, like, if you're successful with the ISA, about 3 times as much. Like something like $40,000 to $50,000. Wow. I think maybe not 3 times. Like, if it was like 17,000 before, then yeah, like about 3, let's say. And I suspect this will push most students not to take the ISA. And they're now promoting their other form of financing, which is like a loan, is literally a loan, but they promise under certain conditions that they will forgive the loan if you don't get a job. But the conditions are somewhat strenuous. So yeah, like, the financing thing fell apart, and I don't know. I think they may have solved some aspects of the online pedagogy problem. And like, if they have, like, all power to them. But like, that was a really tough thing to chew off, Most bootcamp instruction, as far as I'm aware, like, the main way that bootcamps actually work when they work is that they get students really jazzed. Like, you get students really excited to work hard, to put in way more hours than they would in any other form of education, by like motivating them emotionally. And it's my experience that generally this requires some type of in-person instruction, though not always. At minimum, it requires an extremely skilled teacher for the medium of instruction that's been chosen. So either online or in real life, the teacher needs to be really well-versed at, classroom management, getting people engaged. This is super hard. And they also have to be a programmer, so it's crazy. And that they had just solved this out of the gate with online only, to me, is great. Like, with no prior, like, they hadn't run other classes. It's just, we're doing this now. It's so wild, man.
I think majority of coding bootcamps dropped the ball switching to remote. And I think some genuinely tried, and I think some genuinely saw it as an opportunity to bring in more students, make more money, because a lot of coding bootcamps, they didn't drop their prices with remote. And like you said, there's this in-person element that's super motivating. And I think that's a big reason why people join coding bootcamps, and they have not solved the problem or been able to replicate it online. And that's huge.
I don't know, probably some have and some haven't. It's just really hard to assess now because we're so early. I mean, the only point I'm trying to make is, like, online bootcamp pedagogy is very new. And I assume that there's huge variance teacher to teacher. And that's a big part. That's a big part of what I was writing about in my second article, right? Like, that, a huge part of your outcome depends on, like, literally just the teacher that you get, and like whether you vibe with them in the right way, whether they motivate you, like all this stuff. And it's hard to know. And online is just, it's a little trickier.
It is. What do you think about, because in your article, you talked about just outcomes, right? You had compared coding bootcamps that will actually report to SIR and that won't report to SIR. You've kind of mentioned, like, try to avoid self-proclaimed statistics on their website and try to get, like, some founding body to regulate that, or at least, like, audit that. Yeah, and
or at least audit them yourself, Like, a lot of the larger ones will publish, like, their own designed reports, but like an accounting firm has signed off on them, that you can at least sort of trust that they probably haven't done, like, literally made up names and said they graduated, but you can look for yourself to see how they manipulated those numbers and judge whether the risk is worth it.
Okay. And so for those that do report to SIR, you were talking about, it's the problem that you have is the structure, in which that data is reported, kind of. And there are ways that they can be accurate, but also misleading. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Service reporting structure, I want to say, like, I think, you know, is, as far as I'm concerned, the gold standard. You know, a representative General Assembly tried to tear down SIR in a conversation we had about this recent article. But as far as I can assess, SIR has the most aggressive reporting requirements of any structure, which is to say, the main thing that they do that I like is they require the school to, in the first week or two of enrollment, ask the student whether they intend to job seek or not, right? And then they can't change that number. Like, that's the percentage of students that are job seeking. And then you have to just report what percentage of those job seeking grads like got jobs or not. It's very simple, but it's rigorous. It doesn't allow a lot of flexibility. Schools want flexibility to say there's a good reason why that student's not looking for a job and therefore should not count against our numbers, right? Like, schools are highly motivated to find plausible seeming reasons to remove students from this count. And maybe some of those reasons are totally reasonable, in fact, but SIRS, there's just no wiggle room. And maybe that results in an underreporting of statistics, but it's fair. Like, if everyone reported in the structure, everyone would see similar levels of underreporting and it would be even. But the reality is schools are using their own reporting structures and not SIRS, and the reporting results way higher than would be possible under the SIRS structure. You know, like, you know, most notably, General Assembly reports 99.2% of its graduates find jobs, which, you know, I hope that no one listening to this thinks that's a plausible interpretation of reality. You know,
within what time span?
Like, all time.
I mean, job. So yeah, then we get into the details. So like, oh man, with a lot of data that's even reported, if it's not regulated by SIR, because you can distinguish between whether they got like a engineering job specifically or like a non-engineering job.
They have some categories. They try to break that down a little bit, you know, but yeah, you're right. There's so many opportunities for malfeasance in this reporting, and you have to trust someone to some extent. Like, that's true. But the category stuff, I mean, if they say tech job and like the accounting firm is signed off on it, I'm willing to give them a little bit of rope on that, because, you know, you can't, it's actually really hard to write down what is a tech job, right? Like, if I asked you to write a strict definition of like a tech job that like an accounting firm could follow, I think we'd have this, like, that actually I think is a hard problem, and I'm willing to give them the credit for that. I'm just looking at really basic stuff in the piece that I'm talking, really basic stuff, like what percentage of your graduates seem to not be looking for a job? If that number is higher than 10%, something weird is going on, right? Because why do students join boot camps? You know, I think some of them join for fun, but I think that percentage tends to be less than 10%. So if you're reporting 20, 30, 40% of your graduates aren't looking for a job or aren't compliant with career services, something's going wrong, right? Like, and this is just such a basic low level like bump that we can smooth out before we can get into the really tricky stuff of what is a qualifying job or not. You know, I feel like the bar here is really low. Like, that all the big boot camps are doing a really obvious, really shitty fraud. And until students get pissed about it en masse, that start calling out these schools for them, until they start seeing enrollment drop because these numbers are the way they are, like, it's not going to change. You know, well, it will change eventually when something so horrible happens that the government steps in to regulate. But like, that could be years away. You know, it may never happen. Anything's possible, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to get regulation pushed by the state more so than I would depend on the, you know, a federal government. Yeah,
it seems like the states are the ones stepping up here.
Yeah,
and, you know, good for them.
Yeah, and so like in some coding boot camps will like. I can't even think of the name of it, but there was one program that like would kind of offer them this sort of paid position, and it wasn't necessarily this like secondary post education. And so they voided the regulations of the state because they weren't technically the post education that would get those regulations. And there's like really creative ways that programs, I really don't want to give ideas, but you could figure all this out. But there are creative ways that programs will kind of bypass those regulations, even if they do exist in the state. So I feel like
Well, states can offer both the carrot and the stick, you know, like maybe if you come and get accredited, the state will subsidize like your experience somewhat, you know, like, I mean, we're never going to get rid of every bad actor, right? But like, I do think we live in the state of the world where like the 10 largest boot camps, like over half of them are doing this really obvious accounting fraud. You know, that's crazy to me. Like, I don't understand how this can be tolerated by people in the industry. And so long as this goes on, like, I just throw my hands up at it. You know, like I wrote about one school that's doing this, detailed exactly the ways they're doing it. And then I wrote another piece about like how everyone's basically doing the same thing. I don't know what more needs to be done. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how to achieve change here from the outside. I think it's going to have to come from within the industry or from state regulators at this point. And I'm honestly like this really pisses me off. Like, this is illegal. This should be illegal. Like, I don't know. The piece speaks for itself, I think, if you want to talk about it.
So, I mean, you mentioned you really don't know what's actually going to fix this, but what I have my ideas. Before I share those, what would be the strategy that you're leaning on? Is it getting students to be louder? Is that what it is? Or
I actually was trying to convince boot camps to start calling each other out. Like, or for third party, there are a bunch of lead gen sites now. They have to compete with each other more and more. There's like Course Report. There's like Switch Up. You're aware of these things, right? Mm-hmm. Like, these guys make money per head when they refer students to boot camps. These are pseudo regulators in a way, right? Like, they host reviews. Like, if they became more rigorous about who they would or would not take as referrals, that could be a forcing function. But, you know, I was telling General Assembly, like, look, like, you have an incentive. Like, you should have denounced Lambda School, right? And you should have changed your own policies so that there was a clear, bright line between how you report your outcomes and how they report their outcomes. And you should simply use SIR's reporting structure. So right now we're in this catch-22 where all the big boot camps are cheating, and none of them seemingly have an incentive to be the first to stop cheating because their numbers will look worse compared to their competitors. But if they do that contemporaneously with like a post outlining how their competitors are corrupt, I think they could get, I mean, that could help with enrollment. Maybe. It's risky as a marketing play, but if you can begin, like, Lambda School is beginning to be associated with fraudulence, like people become more aware of this idea. It's less clear that people understand like the General Assembly is doing the same thing. You know what I mean? But if you can get people to understand that intuitively via your own marketing, like, there's a chance for like a more ethical boot camp to eat market share from the big ones by forcing them to report more truthfully. But it would take bravery on the part of a particular boot camp operator.
Well, and that's a very hard PR move to make, is to denounce your competitor. And like, the more details you go, it's like, how petty do you look as a program? Like, if you can't let your quality, like the quality of your product, speak for itself when you're kind of just bashing your competitor, it just feels like it's not going to build any more traction.
I agree there's a difficulty in it, but like, let me put it this way. Like, what if you were like, I don't know, what if you were like Ford and you knew that VW was lying about its diesel mile per gallon efficiency rate, right? Like, what if you were the first to discover that? Like, what would you do? You'd inform regulators for sure, but what if there were no regulators, like how we are here? What would you do? I would say it sucks if they're both claiming you get 40 MPG, but the other team is lying about it and you're not. In fact, you're spending like 10 times as much money trying to create that outcome and they're not. Like, you have to do something about it, right? Like, your only choice is to fight or to join them, right? To stop spending on quality education and simply lie, because otherwise you're going to get creamed, right? Because in order to have a quality education, you have to spend more money, which means you will make less money. So unless boot camps are willing to denounce unethical processes, we are going to end up with universally unethical processes, right? Because those who choose not to cheat will simply be killed by the competition, because it's hard for prospective students to actually determine whether the product speaks for itself or not. This is a fundamentally difficult problem. You can't know whether your educational experience is going to get you a job or not. This is like fundamentally unknowable. You only have to go by like heuristic statistics that are reported by the schools. And if those are lies, then what can you do?
I don't think they're like, besides you and me speaking out and like giving voices to students that no longer had voices. And like, it is a tricky thing because we were talking about people that had such a bad experience. They don't really want to go on video necessarily. It's hard to bring them. And even like you still kind of have to protect them. They're still trying to find a job. And if they just go off, that's not going to look great for them, for current employers.
Exactly.
And so, but I feel like the industry in general, I don't feel like there's a lot of profit to be gained. I feel like the scalability has never been solved with coding boot camps. And I feel like coding boot camps are going to start turning into different types of businesses to be able to survive. And I do genuinely feel people that haven't taken outside investment money, that genuinely want to provide a quality education, the smaller coding boot camps, I think they will survive as long as they're not trying to scale.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, I think I'm clinging to a vision that will die personally when I'm talking to you about my designs for how this could get better. I think you're right that this is naive and will never happen. I think you're right that like probably what will happen is large boot camps will continue to consolidate with each other and then eventually do a bunch of stupid partnerships with universities that don't really work, but they get subsidized, right? But I don't think of that as good. You know what I mean? I'm not happy that that's probably what's going to happen. I'm upset. Coding bootcamps represented a new pedagogy, right? Very exciting, very difficult new pedagogy that showed the world that people can learn about 10 times as fast as you think they can learn when you get the conditions just right. And I think that was a really important development. And it may not ever be $100 billion company, but I think it should be, what I would like is if you are the right kind of student with the right type of aptitude, it should be easy for you to enter into a boot camp that will train you well and that will allow you to get a job after. Like, it shouldn't be hard to pick through the mess to find a good one. And it bothers me that a lot of clearly very talented students have been very deeply frustrated by their bootcamp experiences, and that some maybe not so talented students have been like totally financially destroyed by their bootcamp experiences. Like this is the thing. There's both like a wasted potential and like a harm done thing about this. And I don't know where we're going to end up, but it makes me mad. This is why I don't want to write about boot camps anymore. I just get upset.
That's honestly, I've started parting from coding bootcamp reviews just a little bit because it is like, it pisses me off too. And I'm sure my viewers have seen me get emotional about some programs, but it doesn't make me feel good all the time when I end that podcast episode. I remember there was this one night, it's like these students had spent over $10,000, and we even talked a little bit after the episode. And like, I'm just going to say it, like, I wanted to cry for them. I was like, I've
definitely wanted to cry after talking to students, man. You have no idea. Like, it's like students with like, they've been like, I talked to one student that had like a failing kidney through Lambda School or whatever. And like, they wouldn't like, they wouldn't give him like a homework extension or something because like he was in like incapacitating pain for a given day. So he had to like repeat like a whole like month-long unit, and like eventually just had to drop out. And I thought it was like this is the craziest thing I had heard in some time. And I just had to stop after that call, like for a while. Like it can be pretty rough out there, and I think that's the beauty of it and the tragedy of it, right? Like the boot camps actually service a segment of the population that higher ed won't touch, and I think that's beautiful, actually. It's just also really fucking hard. And it sucks, especially like as an underprivileged person, to have your hopes raised so high and then dashed so low by just complete incompetence. That fucking kills me. Anyway, yeah, I feel you, man. All this is to say, yeah, I feel you on that one.
There are real stories that I think people need to hear, like real stories like that, because, with a coding boot camp, you do have students that, I guess I'll dig into this a little bit, but you have students that weren't screened out properly, that weren't ready for the program.
Yeah.
I feel like coding boot camps, if they focus more on their screening process that's behavioral and technical, they could help alleviate a lot of these issues of people just not graduating on time and becoming overwhelmed with the material. Like that screening process, if we could push that, I think it would solve some issues. And then coding boot camps, you know, like as a business, if you're not truly invested in the students, I mean, you have to start looking at like what things cost. And, you know, if a student does have to repeat a class and they weren't able to complete that section, you know, if it's a large program that has scaled, they're probably, honestly, aiming for more profit. They're not dedicating like someone actually having an individual conversation and empathizing with that person.
Yeah. That's such a good point. I've never heard anyone bring that up, actually, but like I totally agree. Like I thought it was so weird that Lambda School's like mastery-based program works by like, hey, you failed your unit, do it again. Like that's not like they didn't get it when they did it the first time in the way that you taught it to them. So there's something missing. It's probably not just reading the same material again and hoping that it clicks. I mean, sometimes that works, but it's brutal, right? Like it's incredibly inefficient. And man, the promise of boot camps was like highly individualized attention from an instructor. Like a lot of feedback really quickly. The instructor notices you're making a mistake almost before you make it, right? Like that's how it was supposed to work. And that's where it does best. And to hear that boot camps have like sort of scaled or devolved to a point where like the mastery help is repeat the unit, like is bonkers to me. Like it feels like we're talking a different language almost. And that also pisses me off. I agree that schools are beginning to realize that they need to scale back and screen a little harder. Like Lambda School is apparently halving its student population in 2021 or 2022, I think. Basically, Austin told me that like they only have like 1,000 students now or something. They used to have like 2,000 plus. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. But also like good for you in a way. Like I think they're realizing that too many of their students are not being successful, and that the harm of having that proportion be the way that it is will damage the school in the long term. So I'm glad that they're scaling back, honestly, which is to say by like screening more aggressively.
It's hard to know what the solution is, right? And it's hard as you and I as outsiders to have a huge amount of influence. All we can do is speak up. All we can do is share stories and encourage other people to speak up. And we can point out these statistics. But like you said, it's going to take some coding boot camps that are in it for the long run, that have honestly, like you said, coding boot camps have made education more accessible that higher education hasn't touched. And there are coding boot camps that believe in that still. I know there are. And it's almost giving them a voice. It's almost letting and encouraging them to speak up, and, figuring out a way in which like we can give them a voice because, they probably have concerns. There are reasons why they haven't spoken up yet. And it's figuring those out and giving them a voice so they can speak up.
I've heard good things about some schools. And from my investigation, some schools do seem to work somewhat well at scale. I think most high profile ones, probably Hack Reactor. Dev Mountain does okay in general. And I've heard good things about like Turing School. They report, so there definitely are schools that are seemingly doing okay out there. I've been really reluctant to like name schools that I think are good, because it's such an awkward position for me, like as a third party observer to be in. Like I can't, like I have no financial stake in any of these outcomes, right? I have to be as neutral as possible. So like recommending a school feels really weird. I do really, again, like I hope that these schools that are operating well, I wish I would talk more about what makes them different. You know what I mean? Like how is a student able to discern the difference between a school that's operating well and not, right? Like the schools that are operating well are the ones that are best informed on this topic. They themselves can do the best job of informing the public of why they're not a scam, or things to look out for in scams. Maybe don't even name any names, but you know what I'm saying? Like I think ethically operating schools have a duty to make themselves better understood here, and to, seek to ameliorate the worst aspects of their unethical competitors. Because, if they don't, right, like external regulation will come in eventually and maybe blow up the space for everybody, right? Like there may be collateral damage as a result. So like people who are operating well have an incentive to figure this out, and they have the most money at stake. Like that's who would give a shit, right? Like the CEO of Hack Reactor or whatever, like, you know, he's got millions of dollars of compensation on the line. Like if there's an existential threat to the industry, that's who I'd expect to be most ready to deal with it, you know, not like random students, not random journalists, you know, like it should be people who have something to lose.
Well, and sometimes that even means just sharing your philosophy. Why you even started the Coding Bootcamp, writing blog articles. Like a lot of coding bootcamps aren't super knowledgeable about SEO. They kind of just write articles and they don't, you know, get backlinks. They don't reach out to influencers enough to like really promote their stuff. And if they did gain more traction around those articles, around their philosophy of what they think students truly need, where students get screwed over. Like as a coding bootcamp, you can talk about that and what you truly believe in without throwing another program under the bus. And I think they just don't want to throw another program under the bus, but they should talk about it. I
think they should minimum talk about it. Maximally, I think it's okay to throw one or two evil people under the bus. You know, like it'll be good press, like if you do it right. Do you want to talk about some other stuff that we think students should look at? You mentioned that you might disagree with some of my recommendations from the recent piece. I think that'd be an interesting thing to talk about. We've also been going for about an hour, so maybe we should get to it.
Sure. How much time do you have left? Because I know we're over.
About half hour, I would say.
Okay, that's cool. There wasn't, I mean, see, talking with you more, I think we do agree on a lot. I think so you had mentioned this 40% that got excluded. Was that Coding Dojo?
That was Dojo, yeah.
Yeah, 40% is a lot. But I think you need to dig into the details and truly decide what is reasonable, like what is a reasonable reason to toss out student data and what isn't, because it sounds like you're kind of just like looking at that high percentage and you haven't really empathized with, there are certain data sets that should be
they don't disclose. They don't disclose.
Yeah.
Like their rep refused to comment on why, like, or what the 40% was, you know, so you can't. Really, right? And you also have to take them at their word. I would say, I mean, the methodology I adopt was like any number above 10% should be really suspect, right? Because if you look at SIR reports, when they pre-ask students whether they're job seeking or not, it seems like almost every school reports that like 90+% of students are job seeking when they go in, you know, so that number would become 40% when they come out. I just don't believe, you know, and don't give credence to. But like, if you want to pick a number that we would say is acceptable, you know, I would say 10. And, you know, ideally, like, I mean, did you meet any bootcamp students that didn't join a bootcamp to get a job? Like they joined for some other reason?
Yes.
How many?
Very few. Sometimes you get product managers, QAs that kind of just want to get a little bit more comfortable. But I would say it's less than 1% easily.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You know, like your own sense of what is reality here, I think. Like we can maybe get to 10. I feel like 10 is even being charitable, frankly, right? But to get to 20, 30, 40, to me boggles the mind. Imagine being in a classroom and like 4 out of every 10 students sitting next to you, like don't want to get a job after this. Like, what does that even mean? Even 2 in 10 is too many. Like, that's why we're all here. That's why we're all paying $15,000 for like a 6-week course or whatever. It's not for fun. We're not going to Disneyland. This isn't a vacation. We're here to make money. You know, like we get it. Like that's how they all market themselves too. So like, it's not like boot camps are putting out ads that say like, come enrich your learning. Like it's change your life, make $100,000 a year and be like, you know, be what you were always meant to be. So, you know, I just like can't accept a number greater than 10.
I get it. I completely get it. Now, I guess where I disagree is you had kind of called out coding bootcamps tossing data based on them not meeting certain criteria. The criteria for all the ISA models and refunds has never been too much, in my opinion. I think what happens...
What do you mean by that? I'm not sure.
You had mentioned something about like the part of the data that kind of leads up to that 40% or data that's not included in people that are reported as SIR. You had mentioned that the criteria alone, I think, shouldn't necessarily exclude it. You felt like the criteria was too hard for students to keep up with, or just reporting to career services.
Do you mean like the refund stuff, like how you get disqualified from career services, like if you're not responding to texts or whatever?
Yes, that, and didn't Did you mention something about like it being excluded from the data of like just follow through rates and people getting jobs, job placement rates as well?
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the categories of like not job seeking. Like if the career services contact you, like, and you don't respond in quite the right way, quite fast enough, like you can be removed from the pool. Yeah. And then you no longer count against the school statistics.
So that's exactly what I'm talking about. And what I'm saying is, I think that's reasonable. I think a lot of people go into these coding boot camps without, first of all, coding boot camps missell their services all the time. And it's like, you're going to get, you know, a top tech job, you're going to make $100,000. And a lot of people are very misled into thinking that this program is so good that it's going to get me the job. And a lot of people come into coding boot camps with really, really bad habits, just like even being able to schedule your day, pace yourself, motivate yourself, keep yourself healthy. And then the coding boot camp, they're kind of forced through like, okay, I at least have a schedule, even though it's a really unhealthy schedule. I'm probably not eating a full lunch. I'm probably drinking too much caffeine. And, you know, then they come out of it. They had bad habits before they went in. They come out of it without bad habits. Now they don't have someone on top of them 24/7 and they don't respond to career services. I feel like people need to spend more time before they join developing good, healthy habits. And that will,
yeah, I mean, look, man, that'd be ideal, but like the school admitted that person.
And they shouldn't have. And that's where the criteria for admitting should be increased.
I just don't think, like, you know, like you're right, obviously, like at some level, like it'd be better if students were better. No argument for me. What I don't agree with is that should like allow the school a reporting out. You know, I think you should take that as an L. Like if you admitted a student who like didn't have the proper bearing to succeed at your school, you got to eat that L. Like they got to count, like you got to eat the 0.1% or whatever that would influence your statistics. I don't think that you should be able to remove them because they didn't have the proper bearing. You know what I mean? Because that is indistinguishable from the school is so bad that people just drop out and stop responding. It invites this adverse selection problem. We can't tolerate a world where that's allowed because it would allow bad actors to basically just burn students out and then pretend like everyone that remained was successful, which is what I'm saying is exactly what happened. You know what I mean? Like from the outside, we cannot distinguish between like, why do students stop responding coding Dojo? I wonder why, you know? It seems that coding Dojo seems to either enroll like just disproportionately poor students who don't want to engage, or that they are themselves a disproportionately poor school that students begin to seek to stop engaging with, right? And like, we can't tell the difference between those two things so long as this category is allowed for exclusion. You know, so I don't respectfully agree that we should give schools this buy. I think they should have to report that these students just simply didn't get jobs. You can report that a certain percentage of students, you know, eventually had a falling out with career services if you want to be transparent about, you know.
But does SIR.org allow that? Do they have a specific criteria for that?
They have no. The SIR just assumes you'll try your best to help all your students and you get whatever number you get.
But you might still be trying as hard. And I don't think the fault is entirely on coding boot camps. I think a lot of people, they fall off.
I agree. But all I'm saying is you're right. There's some cases where it's clearly the student's fault. You know, absolutely.
I think it's most cases.
All I'm saying is we can't allow schools to claim that as an excuse because of the perverse incentives of it. I think they just have to eat that loss. If everyone eats that loss, everyone's numbers will be a little lower. They might be 70 instead of 80. That's fine, right? In fact, I think it's a better reflection of reality, right? Because like, you know, when you tell students that like 90% of graduates get jobs and you don't really tell them that you've removed the 20% of students that are like really lazy or whatever, and they don't talk to career services, it's really easy for a student that might be a little lazy internally to think, oh, like the rate is like everyone gets a job. Like this won't be that hard, you know? I think we should report the true rate as a service to students. Like if the true rate is something like 60 to 70%, that is a really different number than 80 to 90%. You know what I mean? In terms of the psychological impact of like how girded your loins should you have if you're a student entering the school. And I think we actually do students a disservice by making the numbers seem better, right? Because it makes them less prepared for the battle that they will be expected to fight. And, you know,
I agree with
that's
that.
how I feel.
I think I don't think the solution is to tell coding bootcamps they need to be more transparent. I don't think coding bootcamps, if SIR.org is the golden standard, I don't think coding bootcamps have the option to give that extra criterion, give that transparency. I feel like when you
no, they don't. I mean, you can self-publish an addendum or something, but like your SIR report has to follow the standard, which I think is good.
So what do you think about like smaller coding boot camps taking charge of that? Do you think it's going to put them out of business, or do you think more people are going to appreciate their honesty?
I think smaller boot camps tend to be better, and this is how they compete, right? Like they actually do better instruction, so their numbers end up looking pretty similar, actually, enough, despite not being fraudulent. But that's a tax on them, right? I think it's unfortunate. Yeah. Like, and you know, there's nothing to say about it. Like it's the case that boot camps, small boot camps, are competing in an unfair market right now, right? Like the largest boot camps tend to be defrauding their students, and you know, we can't do anything about that. I mean, maybe defrauding is too strong a word. Maybe they're just like using misleading marketing, right? Like maybe 99.2% asterisk is okay. Maybe that's fine, right? Like that's up to like history to judge. I don't really know, but it seems to me that smaller boot camps are at a disadvantage, but are surviving, and I hope that that continues to be the case.
I agree with everything that you're saying. I do. And I feel like we're definitely bouncing ideas back and forth of what that solution is and who takes ownership. It's very hard. I hope the coding bootcamp industry doesn't continue deteriorating in trust and quality. I truly do. I personally don't have the perfect solution for it. Like you said, it's not on the students to really speak up, because they're, like you said, a lot of students going through a coding bootcamp and trying to become a software engineer is already an incredibly hard process, trying to manage family, trying to manage anything else in their life, maybe a poor financial situation before they even started, and now they have this weight. It's like, you're right. Students, I don't think in general have the capacity to make the impact they need to make to get larger coding boot camps to step up. It has to be something else. And I do think it's smaller coding boot camps kind of just like wearing it out for the next 5 years, letting larger coding boot camps, like, I think it's all coming out. I think a lot of these larger coding boot camps are realizing, you know, they can't hide the statistic forever. They can't manipulate the data or mislead with presenting certain data forever. I do feel like more of this is becoming more exposed, and I feel like it's just going to get a few more years.
Yeah. I mean, death by 1,000 cuts, you know, like we each do our little part. I don't think there is ever going to be like one thing that is the solution. Like it will be like, this is a coalition effort, you know. I think universities have a role to play in all of this also, you know, like universities have the ability to crown winners too. You know, like their budgets are so much larger. They could pick a good bootcamp and make it better, you know. Like the market could be overturned not by negative regulation, but by the infusion of resources into those that are doing well. And this is possible too. But you know, it remains to be seen whether colleges will understand or adopt the bootcamp model. Really, I don't know.
I think I have yet to see a program get bought out by a college that hasn't had its quality lowered.
It's tough. It's tough. And I think, like, you know, I think we all probably have to accept at some level reversion to the mean is likely true. Like all boot camps probably in the long run will eventually be average, probably, because what makes an educational experience exceptional or not tends to be an individual teacher, and these guys retire or change jobs. You know what I mean? Like on average, the educational system is average and it's designed to be average, right? Like that's actually an achievement of scale to some extent. So, you know, I don't know, like, can you even really chase the return of a good boot camp? Like your information is always a year out of date. So I don't know. I think we should just, what would make me happy is if we ensured a minimum level of quality that we found acceptable and then just said, go to town after that. Like just a certain level of required reporting. That's it. You're allowed to market yourself however you want. Otherwise, I think even Lambda School would be allowed under this model. Like their placement rates are pretty bad, but if they just said, you know, like, you know, 50%, that's us, like, that's fine, I guess, right? Like if we just agreed on what the minimum level of transparency and reporting that we wanted was, and then we all just did it, the market would sort out the rest, I think. I have actually faith that states will get there. I think states can get there. Like California, especially, I think can get there.
Yeah. Yeah. One good thing about California is the regulation that it has brought on different programs, but I think that's going to cause businesses to up and move to states with less regulation.
If they accept students from California, they have to play by the rules. It doesn't matter where the school is; it matters where the student is. So
really, I heard something different.
That's my impression. All right, I could be wrong. Actually, strike that from the record if I'm wrong.
Okay,
but that was my impression, and BP.
Because I remember talking to a CEO, and he mentioned that he lived in a certain state that kind of like it didn't really have to deal with certain regulations. I know he has students from California. I know that. So I
think you're right. I don't know why I thought that then. What am I thinking of?
I don't know. I could be wrong too.
I also have been told that more and more states are following the lead of the BPPE. So just by virtue of them doing it, like they have to play ball. But I thought the BPPE offers some protection to California students, regardless of whether the school is, but may not be as comprehensive. Okay. Yeah, we can, whatever.
Okay. All right. That's fine. So I feel like we dove into, I don't know, I think this was an interesting conversation. And I actually, one thing I want to empathize with is like, the more you dig into this coding bootcamp stuff, I'm glad I'm not the only one that kind of gets down and a little bit depressed on, you know, everything that I'm discovering too, because it's hard to report on this. It really is.
There's very few people out there who are just literally going and talking to students all the time. You know what I mean? Like there's a few of you, like that Dorian guy is kind of like that too, right?
Yeah, he's self-taught. I love that he's self-taught because he really challenges coding bootcamps because of that.
Yeah, like he has the credentials to be able to do it. But like I would say there's probably like under 20 people in the world that aren't employed by coding bootcamps that are routinely talking to, you know, coding bootcamp graduates. So, you know, I definitely respect. I remember seeing your podcast and thinking like, whoa, this guy's like serious, you know? Like that's what made me want to talk to you actually. Like, you know, listeners may not know, but Don and I got in a little tiff on Twitter before we end up like actually talking to each other now. And one thing that, you know, turned me around, made me serious about actually just wanting to come on the podcast was I saw that you had a very long history talking to many students on the podcast. And the only person who would do something like that is someone who actually gave a shit, you know? So I was confident that we'd have a good conversation no matter what. Yeah,
I agree. We did. I actually had a different view of you before I ended up talking with you, but yeah, I'm glad we did talk. I do. I really do appreciate what you're doing. I love what you're doing. I know it can get you down a little bit, but I'm glad you did. I'm glad I did, you know, reply with kind of a petty tweet and we just, you know.
Yeah, I mean, if you hadn't, we wouldn't be here. You know, right?
Exactly. And, you know, it really does feel like
so much of this stuff happens as a result of petty tweeting.
Well, I'm not encouraging it. I'm just saying sometimes it does. Maybe.
I'm encouraging it.
Yeah, I know you are. All right. So I feel like we covered everything. Do you have any final notes or any final questions?
Well, there's one thing that you mentioned wanting to talk about, like, I'll try to go over it quickly. Like in my reporting, one thing I noticed, like Jesse Farmer says that like one important heuristic for assessing the quality of a prospective coding bootcamp experience is like how often you receive code review. And I think you said that you didn't necessarily agree. And if you disagree, I'd love to hear why, because I actually strongly agree with that statement as well.
How often you get a code review?
Yeah, like a real code review from like a real instructor.
The problem is a lot of these code reviews come from instructors that haven't had professional experience.
That's what I mean. Yeah. The quality of the instructor giving the code review is really important too.
Yeah. So I guess like maybe it was
how often and how good, I think, are the two axes on which one should evaluate the code reviews, right? Might be a little better to get good code reviews less frequently than a bunch of like fast bad reviews. But I guess what I was trying to say is we're at so low, like the bar is so low. You know what I mean? Like we're talking about like people go through Lambda School without getting any code review, you know? So like just anything.
That's ridiculous.
Better than that, you know? And I think it is in my mind, it's a good metric to judge a school on. It shows how serious they are. Like if they are taking the time to give real code reviews, it's a lot of work. Like it's like grading homework is actually one of the most time consuming aspects of being a teacher. I don't think a lot of people outside teaching realize this. Grading homework is a huge pain in the ass. Code reviews are basically like, you know, grading homework on steroids, right? Because like, you're assessing so many things, right? Like you're assessing like, one, does the code do the right thing? Two, like if it doesn't do the right thing, what misunderstanding does the teachers think the student has made in order to produce like the wrong code? If the code is working, but it could be better, like in what way could it be better? And what does the student, like what rotation of the student's mind does there need to be for them to be able to perceive the like more elegant solution? Or like, is the student repeating themselves unnecessarily? Like, right. Like basically what I'm saying is like, while the teacher is reading the code, they have to run like a full simulation of the student's mind. And then they have to like eject like some assessment of where they think the student ought to improve next. And this is really customized, difficult labor, but it is like, that's where the rubber meets the road for like how students really learn from good teachers. It's not just everyone look at the same lecture and then you get like your code is 1 through 5 good. It's like, you're making this type of mistake. Like, here's my recommendation for how to approach this problem in the future. You need to slow down. You're thinking about this type of thing, like you need to like be able to step back and think about what parts of your program are repeated. Like, whatever it is, it's a labor of love to be able to deliver that to the student. And, if you can find some indication in a school that a school is willing to deliver you that labor of love, I think it is, it's important. It's important. And if you're getting no code review, you should definitely know that before you go in, like it's crazy to me that people don't know sometimes that that's what they're in for.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if I disagree with you. I feel like it's more than just frequency though. And you've emphasized that it's more than that.
Sure. But that's all you can measure. You know what I mean? Like, that's all if you ask someone whether the code reviews are good, they're going to say yes. So, like all you can ask is like, okay, how often? So it's just a tool, like it's going to be imperfect. But
well, you can probably come up with questions about like how they felt about themselves. Did they repeat the same mistake in the future? Were they able to, accomplish something they've been stuck on?
Sure. For an enrolled student. Absolutely. But like my advice is for prospective students, you know what I mean? Like who aren't in it yet and can only ask questions from the outside. You can only ask really objective questions,
Yeah,
I think that's the difficulty.
Quality of instructor. You have to get credentials with the person that's getting the code review. My only skepticism is there are a lot of people giving code reviews that haven't had tons of professional experience.
Yeah. I think what you can definitely ask is the person who's going to be doing my code reviews, like, are they an instructor? Who are they? Tell me a little bit about the situation, right? Like you can ask a couple of questions like that. And, I think even just beginning the conversation about code reviews is enough really to see in the beginning too, frankly, because I think the bar is really low, actually.
I think I agree with you more than I disagree. I don't even remember saying I disagree.
Word.
So
okay.
Disappoint you with that one.
All right, I'm glad we got that one out of the way. Don, it has been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, this was a fun conversation. Hey, before you go, you want to shout anything? I'll link a couple of your articles below, but what do you want to shout?
Just link them that article. That's the one that I want students to read about, like, the one that touches on GA, coding Dojo, etc., and has some tips about, like ISAs, like the code review thing we just talked about. That's the one I think your audience could benefit from reading. And I hope they get to it. I have nothing to sell, so I hope they have a nice time reading it.
Okay. Well, at the very least, if you do read the article, you like it, show it some love. But Vincent, if you would just stick around just for a couple minutes. But yeah, this is a fun conversation.
Okay, man.